Hello and welcome to my lecture series on supplements for athletics. In the first lectures or set of lectures, I covered creatine supplementation. Now I will go on to beta-alanine. Now, I have to, of course, say that I will be utilizing various lecture notes from undergraduate and graduate classes, and I do need to mention the professors who prepare these. Now, I have made modifications and additions. However, I will be using PowerPoints from Dr. Hong and Dr. Zordos. So that's my disclaimer. Now, let's get started. Oh yeah, by the way, I do list the additional supplements that I will be going through in time, and maybe I will add more though. But today, beta-alanine. So what is it? Well, it's typically powder, as we can see up in the right corner. Looks sort of like creatine. And powder, well, you can probably get it in pills as well. In fact, you can, but as we'll later go through the dosing, when you want to take a couple of grams of things, then the tablets might be unpleasant because they're too big and hard to swallow. So anyway, so powder is probably the best option. Now, what is it? It's a beta-alanine. It's a amino acid, and what it's really supposed to do is increase time to fatigue. So mechanism of action would be to increase muscle carnosine, which serves as a buffer for hydrogen. Now, this is I think this is specific to humans, the carnosine, which is the muscle buffer. The efficacy grade would probably be C. It can have potential benefits, but it has to, of course, be specific to activities where lactate accumulation is an issue. So generally between 60 and 240 seconds, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, but around that range. So in short, what is beta-alanine? It's a naturally occurring beta amino acid, similar to alpha-alanine, which is non-essential. The only difference being where basically the amino acid group sits in relation to the carboxyl group, which we can see here. It's just a little positioning difference. Now, to better understand how exactly beta-alanine works, we have to go back to the slide where we look at the various energy systems. Recall for creatine, or if you saw that series, that utilized the immediate energy system, which was for a very short duration and did not involve oxygen. Now, beta-alanine will be for a different system, which is called fast glycolysis. So I'm actually going to go through that in relative short. This is also a anaerobic system, but as opposed to the ATP PCR, which is alactic, so it is anaerobic alactic. This, however, is anaerobic lactic, and I'm going to kind of show what that really means and how that really comes about. But according to there will be various sources saying slightly different things as to what are the time frames in which the various energy systems are used. To be noted, and the intensity levels, of course. Now, to be noted, you will never utilize only one energy system. Your energy always comes from all three at any given point. However, there will be a dominant one. So when I say that we're using fast glycolysis, then what I really do mean is that that is a dominant system. And there are breakdowns for more or less for what intensities and what time frames the various systems are dominant. But anyways, so we'll be looking at this fast glycolysis. And this is going to be from following the immediate ATP PCR, but before the oxidative aerobic system really becomes dominant. So glycolysis, or fast glycolysis, is going to have phases in which it goes. It will be utilizing, it can utilize glycogen, but we're just going to look at the glucose. So it's going to have an investment phase. This, by the way, takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell, and basically what happens in the investment phase is that ATP, your standard energy unit, is utilized to basically cleave or split the glucose into two 3 carbon molecules, and yeah, this costs 2 ATP. Now, once these are split, they will go through a series of steps, which I really won't go into too much detail. I'll just point out a few things. The end result of becoming pyruvate. So things to note though, in step 4, this NAD plus, which becomes NADH, it's basically, not to get too complicated, but it is a hydrogen carrier, and hydrogen carriers are very important because they are the vital component in oxidate phosphorylation. So in aerobic energy production, they will play an important part in Krebs cycle and later the electron transport chain, where basically the majority of your ATP is actually produced. So these are very important, but note how NAD plus comes in and becomes NADH. Also in this phase 2, so each process, because it's cleaved into two 3 carbon molecules, it shows here, right, 3 carbon, as opposed to the 6 carbon glucose, will yield 2 ATPs along the way, so twice 1, and because there are 2, then 4 ATPs. So the net gain of this fast glycolysis is actually 2 ATP. It's very inefficient and it's also pretty dirty, which I won't really go into, but it's not the most efficient way of producing energy. But it is quick though. Now recall from the last slide that the end result of this fast glycolysis was pyruvate, and why we say pyruvic acid here we're going to get into in a moment. Also, recall the NAD had to go in for the fast glycolysis to be able to work. Now here what happens is that pyruvic acid will react with NADH and hydrogen and be catalyzed through lactate dehydrogenase enzyme to form lactic acid, freeing up the NADH, which can then feed back into the fast glycolysis. That, of course, is very important for continued energy production. So now let's just very briefly look at this lactic acid or lactate. What do we call them? Well, they can really be used interchangeably because lactate is a conjugate base of lactic acid. Basically lactic acid is produced in glycolysis, but then it rapidly dissociates to lactate and releases that hydrogen ion, which we can see here in this little graphic below. And it's typically this hydrogen ion that causes all kinds of problems and leads to fatigue, actually. Well, I would say in sports, but perhaps in other places too, which is why I hesitated. But this is what creates that acidic environment. So just as a slight overview, basically this whole process would start off with glucose. Glucose would go through fast glycolysis and it would produce ATP. In the process, it would utilize NAD plus and it would make NADH plus hydrogen. It would also form pyruvate. Now, in order to free up that NAD again to keep this process going, because this thing is spinning around and around and around really fast as the muscle is working, then pyruvate is catalyzed by lactate dehydrogenase enzyme, and it helps free up that NADH in the process, creating lactate, and with lactate comes that hydrogen. So what's the problem with the hydrogen? Well, it creates a acidic environment in the cell. It basically lowers the pH, and what happens when the pH lowers, we can actually look at this little graphic here, is that enzyme activity becomes reduced, right? So reactions will occur slower, and that's the purpose of enzymes, is to catalyze or make reactions go in the optimal way. Control reactions, basically. As pH goes up too much or down too much, then enzyme activity is compromised. So basically, for the more lactic acid an athlete can produce and handle, the greater the power output is going to be. And well, here in this slide it was used that speed athletes, they must be able to handle a lot of lactic acid. Actually, I would think that bodybuilders would be a really good example of somebody who needs to needs to be able to handle a lot of lactic acid. And then just a little caveat here on the side. A lot of people, I think, still think that lactic acid is going to give that soreness because they feel that burn. It's like, next day I'm going to be sore. Well, that's not it. It has nothing to do with. It has to do with muscle damage, actually. So lactic acid definitely does not create soreness. But what happens to it? So lactate and the hydrogen, it finds its way through in and out of the cell through a membrane-bound transport mechanism. They're called monocarboxylate transporters, MCTs. And these are basically membrane-bound and concentration-driven. There are many different types, by the way. I think there are 14 different types, and 1 through 4 deal with muscle tissue. Well, they deal with all sorts of tissues, in fact. And they transport lactate and ketone bodies across cell membranes. But this is, of course, beyond the, and of course a bunch of hormones too, in fact. But anyways, that's beyond the scope of this particular lecture, but very interesting topic in itself. That's how, for instance, a brain or central nervous system or something like that could feed off of ketones in the state of ketosis. But anyway, so basically the lactate is shuttled in the blood, and that's important to understand. And what drives it is, or pushes it out, is this monocarboxylate transporter. So lactate shuttle, we can look at this. This is kind of how that works. So we see here FG. I think it's fast glycolytic fibers that would stand for. In these types of fibers, you will utilize glucose, or he says glycogen, but whatever, we can do glucose as well. It says that because muscle glycogen is your initial, most immediate fuel, and then glucose will come from the blood, and it's more of a sustained thing. But anyways, and it will produce this lactate. The lactate will then find its way into the blood, and also carbon dioxide and oxidative phosphorylation from slow oxidative fibers, that should stand for. It will go into the blood, the lactate and the carbon dioxide, and it will go through the heart. The heart, by the way, likes lactate. It can eat that, I believe, through these MCTs, of course. It can also eat fats. That's the other thing. It can eat fats as well. That's a separate topic. And then, of course, here we see that lactate is only lactate. There's no CO2, and that's, of course, because when it goes to the heart, it is also pumped through the lungs, and in the lungs that exchange occurs. So then this lactate, this goes back into these slow oxidative fibers, which are essentially slow twitch fibers, and then the fast oxidative, of course, fast twitch fibers. Now this is the slow twitch fibers. They benefit from all those nice endurance adaptations of increased capillarization, so better transport of blood to the cell. And specifically also increase mitochondrial density, so better blood diffusion and more mitochondria. So it's a quicker way to the mitochondria and more mitochondria. So this slow twitch fibers are much better at processing this in the mitochondria, because what can happen in the presence of oxygen, where these guys can process, is lactate then actually can be processed into acetyl-CoA, and acetyl-CoA takes the aerobic, drives the aerobic reaction. And I probably should have actually mentioned this, how in the presence of oxygen, pyruvate does not become lactate, but it actually goes to mitochondria instead. But anyways, so that's called lactate shuttle. Now the radioactive tracer will show that what happens to lactate. So about 70% of lactate is going to be utilized by other tissue that I just showed through this lactate shuttle system. About 20% is going to go to the liver, go through the Cori cycle and be converted to glucose, and 10% to amino acids. So in summary of this particular energy system, the hydrogen, also the kind of hydrogen mechanism of fatigue. So hydrogen ions accumulate when lactic acid dissociates to lactate, and this accumulation of H+ leads to acidosis, or or basically it produces that more acidic environment, where normal muscle pH is around 7.1. As it decreases the intramuscular pH, then muscle contraction is compromised, and this of course results in decreased force production and fatigue. Where fatigue we can call a drop in motor output characterized by a decrease in energy stores, ATP PCR, and the intracellular accumulation of metabolites, and this is primarily in this case the H plus ions. And they do a whole host of other things which is beyond the scope of this right here. But anyway, so this actually takes us into the question, okay, so how does beta alanine help? And that I will cover in the next bit. Once again, I'm around like 15-16 minutes, where I always aim for 10 minutes. So I'll take a break and then get back to the second part on how beta alanine does its thing.